issues that have destroyed my life? Well, my friend, I have the answer. Bible Way Hibner Memorial Church of God in Christ presents Chain Breakers, this and every Sunday at 9 a.m. here on WHYL.
From the L.B. Smith Ford Lincoln Studios, Oldies 102.9 is WHYL Carlisle.
Welcome to the Real Estate Radio Guys, your weekly source for all things real estate. We're your hosts, real estate broker John Rainville and your mortgage expert Kingsley Harmer discuss everything from mortgage rates to home staging for foreclosures and everything in between that affect the daily real estate market. Real people, real questions, real answers. Today's show is brought to you by www.pagoloan.com, your source for new mortgage loans. NMLS number 1018. EnviroQuest, trusted for home inspections and radon mitigation in Central PA for over 25 years. And brokersrealty.com, the easiest way to search for real estate in your hometown. Now, on to the show.
Good morning. You're listening to the Real Estate Radio Guys. I'm John Rainville from Brokers Realty here in Central Pennsylvania, Maryland, and New York. My co-host, as usual this morning, is
Kingsley Harmer, RH Funding.
RH Funding.
RH Funding.
So this is a new venture or a better venture?
Little better venture, yeah.
All right. So I mean,
a little bit more control, a little bit more, definitely control of pricing, which is good. So a little bit more competitive. Number one.
But our listeners, some of them may be new today. So tell them what you do.
Well, of course, mortgages for the last 20 years, plus, occasionally I'll dabble in, real estate. But free pre-approvals for anybody that's out there. I specialize, as fun as it may be sometimes, and is people with not perfect credit. We've got programs, your typical down the 580, which a lot of your vanilla lenders won't do. But then we also have programs below the 580 credit scores. Different programs for self-employed. Now there's more and more programs coming out, which of course we have complete access to all of them as far as alternative docs. I mean, now we do no doc loans again, so it's actually very exciting. I'm looking forward to it. It's been a time-consuming week as far as getting all that up, but still up and live at pagoloan.com. The office number 717-200-4800. Anybody that needs a free pre-qualification, and I do work on weekends.
What about nights?
Yeah, past 12 o'clock, I don't really accept phone calls. So, but I have had phone calls at 10 o'clock. Surprisingly on a Saturday night.
So anything shifting in the mortgage market right now? I know what I'm seeing on the real estate boards. That I follow intensely every day. Is that they're talking about this, what they feel is going to be the Fed's hiking the rate next week. But isn't that usually haven't they always usually priced that in? I mean, the lenders are pretty savvy to this.
The market builds it in even before it gets there.
Right.
And you've seen the rates go up considerably over the last few weeks.
Right.
I mean, they've gone up, they've gone down, but from a consistent basis, they've gone up. So the fact that they're going to hike rates is actually a very good sign. That means the economy's doing great. As you saw, the unemployment rate was down at an all-time low in history, and that's a very good sign for our economy and for housing.
So just out of curiosity, conventional loan, good credit, about where's the rate at right now? 5.5?
Oh, no.
More?
8%.
Only 8?
Only 8%. No, we're actually still floating between like 4.6 and 5%.
Really?
Yeah, depending on all your LTVs and everything else. And now keep in mind, I like I said, I've got a little bit better control over some of the crediting and pricing in a lot of these programs. So I've dropped a bit. So I'm probably a little bit more competitive than I would say most in the industry at this point.
Yeah, because I would have thought we would have been in the 5s now.
And last week, everything was pushing 5.125.
Because right now it seems like the market's hot. I mean, last June we'd seen a fall off, and this June it seems like it is really hot.
Well, there was a spike in interest rates last week. for a very short time, and then it settled back down.
But when we're talking a spike, how much did they go up? How much did they bump?
0.25%.
Yeah, so really inconsequential unless you're buying to the max, right? Really.
Well, yeah.
I mean, I still look at 5 or 5.5 as free money.
And as much as I hate to say it, everybody says historically rates are extremely low, which they are, but everybody's kind of getting upset with the same phrase. But at the end of the day, I look back when we bought our house, the one we're in now, back in 2009, and interest rates were actually higher than they are today.
Well, so what was your rate at back there? Do you remember?
5.25%.
Oh, 5.25%.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
so
it's still free money.
It's still free money.
Too.
From 10 years ago, we're still lower than that. So it's still a great time to buy. Now, is it 3.5%? No, but you can always buy your rate down to that, especially if you know it's going to be your forever home. However, most people historically will stay in their home about 7 years on average, or refinance after 7 years.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, Central Pennsylvania seems to be a little bit, conservative on some of that. They seem to hesitate. Do you think the refis are done, or do you think there's still people out there who should refi? What would be the rate that would make you? So if I'm at 7.25%, should I refi?
Yeah.
If I'm at 6%, should I refi?
Yeah.
If I'm at 5.75%, should I refi? Starts to get close.
If the loan amount that you have is large enough, you can see a difference.
Well, if you're like Big Dog back there, he's got like a $500,000 mortgage.
Well, yeah, he lives in that mansion, 1.5 value, right, over there on the cliffs.
Yeah,
right. So, at a
but he's got to pay down to only $500,000.
At a $500,000 loan, 0.5% is going to make a difference in your payment. Okay. So if you're doing it, I mean, there's a lot of reasons to refinance other than rate. However, a lot of people want to consolidate all your debt down, lower your payment down, lower your interest rate on all your credit cards, whatever the case may be.
Well, I was actually talking to I'm going to say older, but not all the kids are out of the house now, and they love their house. It's set up to whereas they can age in place, and they're thinking about refinancing and going to a 30-year term. Go with the 30-year term. Just drop the payment down. If they want to make the bigger payment, they can. But it was going to drop their payment. I'm going to say when I looked at it with them, I was thinking about what they're paying was about $1,400, and because now they owe very little, it would take it down to almost like $1,000 off of that. I'm talking just principal and interest. Well,
and every single buyer is going to have their own. I don't want to say dilemma, but everybody has their own individual goals. And
everybody's situation's different, so that's really why they should reach out to somebody like you, because it's not cookie cutter. It's not something you can just go on the internet and plug in your numbers.
When you retire, you think about it.
I'm going to spend it all before I retire.
When you retire, a lot of people, well, I should say back in the good old days, but it was always, one of the number one priorities is what's my legacy? What am I leaving to my kids? So it was always about getting that mortgage paid off by the time you're retired or by the time you pass away, so that you can leave a house to your children. That's not always the case anymore, for sure. A lot of people are rolling their money in a 1031 exchange. We had a great show about that, going down to Florida or wherever they want to go, and rolling their equity into another home. But a lot of these people that do that 30 years, especially blue collar, say they work their whole life, they pay off their mortgage, and now they're retired, but their retirement income's only $500 or $1,000 a month plus whatever your Social Security is.
Yeah,
and sense. Most companies don't even give you retirement anymore,
right?
Or a pension.
Well, so this morning we're going to be talking about, I guess, about all things water for one, and we're going to be talking about Phase 1 environmental audits and things like that. Our guest this morning's Peter Robelen from GeoServices Ltd. They're local, they're right over there. Well, I consider it New Cumberland, but it's like Cedar Cliff area.
Camp Hill.
And Peter's been doing this for 35 years, so has a little bit of experience,
little knowledge,
and we're going to learn about Phase 1 audits and stuff like
that
today. Good morning, Peter. Are you there?
I am. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. So, introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about what you do, and what are those funny initials after your name?
The initials, the PG, stands for professional geologist. It's a process. It's similar to the professional engineering certificate licensure. As you indicated, I've been doing this for an awful long time. GeoServices was founded in 1989, so as a firm we've been doing geology and environmental work for coming up on 30 years now. And we, as you indicated, we're located off of Cedar Cliff Drive in Camp Hill. So we are local. We've got a really good understanding of environmental and geologic conditions in the Harrisburg and central Pennsylvania area, although we work throughout the state and in Maryland and New York and New Jersey and all over the place in the Mid-Atlantic. But our concentration is primarily in central Pennsylvania. We do everything from environmental site assessments, as the topic for today is identified, but we also get involved with an awful lot of water supply development, groundwater cleanup, environmental site remediation, and sort of a sideline, not a sideline, but an awful lot of work that I do personally has to do with litigation support, expert testimony, and so forth.
Interesting. Wow. So what would be the number one reason that you get a phone call today?
Well, it depends on the day, I suppose. But we get calls for environmental site assessments. We get the calls for site cleanups. We just finished a huge site cleanup in the Williamsport area for one of the gas producers. We get involved with. I get calls occasionally to help out with a litigation or a lawsuit.
So mostly commercial is what it sounds like.
Yeah, we do some residential, but it's difficult. It's simply because the scope of the work is overwhelming for most residential users. I often joke in a sense that for a residential person, individual, for someone owning a property, unless they're talking about commercial development, I can't afford to hire myself.
So, can you give? So, all right. Let's just say, for example, because I'm sure some of our listeners don't know where some of your services get utilized, but let's just say, all right. Right now, I've got 3 farms listed up in Halifax, and some of these old farmers, they had the old junk piles. Is that something I would bring you in on for your services?
Sure. Take a look at the potential for contamination from the junk pile. And also, if you think about it, if the purpose of selling the farm is for a residential development and so forth, you're going to have to take a look at the water supply, take a look at how you're going to handle sewage, and if it's going to be on-lot disposal systems, what the impacts of the sewage systems might be on the groundwater, all those kinds of things. And in central Pennsylvania, in at least in Cumberland, in the Cumberland County area, not so much Perry County, but in the Cumberland County and Dauphin County areas, there are lots of problems that we get involved with sinkhole development and trying to forecast where they might occur, so the developer can work around them.
Interesting. Pete, can you give our listeners an idea? I mean, the term that I hear out there a lot, especially in the commercial arena, is like a Phase 1 audit. What does that involve?
Phase 1 audit is if we talk about what the purpose of it is, or the goal of the Phase 1 audit is really to determine whether or not there's a potential for an environmental problem to exist on this site. And if some of your listeners have seen these before, they're probably familiar with the term. It's called a REC, R-E-C. It stands for Recognized Environmental Concern, and that's an ASTM standard. But the goal is to determine whether or not there's a potential for an environmental problem to exist.
What's AFTM?
It used to stand for American Society for Testing Materials. It's a national organization. It may even be international at this point, that develops standards for all kinds of things. As I think my history indicates, it was originally started back when the railroads were first going to try to set up a standard for steel because of the failures of steel rail. So it provides standards for just about everything you can think of. It even provides standards now for aircraft construction. Anybody can join if you've got an interest in what they're doing. As I say, they develop standards for all kinds of things. And in this case, they have developed a standard for an environmental site assessment. Back in the 80s, when I first started GeoServices, there was no specific standard, and so everybody was kind of on their own in terms of trying to develop something. And what the ASTM standard has done is codify and provide a set of standards that every person who engages an environmental consultant to complete an environmental site assessment at least knows that there's a minimum set of bits and pieces that are going to be covered as part of that assessment. And lots of things are part of this whole process.
So is a phase one, I guess I'm sure obviously because phase one indicates that there's a phase two and a phase three. So in a phase one, is that more of like a visual inspection or?
Yeah, it includes well, there are a couple. There are some critical elements to it. One is the first, probably one of the first things you do is to take a look at the historical information for the property. You look at aerial photographs. Take a look at EPA, DEP files for the site and nearby properties. Take a look at Sanborn maps if they're available. Take a look at federal and state environmental databases. Once you've done all that, then you need to take a look, at least get some background information on the soils and geology and groundwater at the site. And the reason for that is to try to determine whether or not there's a potential pathway for contaminants to come onto your site from a neighboring property, or if you have a contamination on your site, the potential for contaminations to go on to flow onto somebody else's property. But probably the most critical piece of it is the reconnaissance survey, and that's a visual inspection of the property and the structures. And when I say the structures, that's both inside and out. You take a look at what, even something as small as a shed, to see if there's any chemicals like gasoline or paint thinner or whatever happens to be around that could potentially pose an environmental problem.
So is when you're driving down the road and you see all these little guys with these orange cameras and it looks like they're scoping almost between two monograms and they're set up on tripods.
That's a survey, dude.
Yeah, that's a surveyor. That's a land surveyor.
Well, I'm telling you, we got to bring you in for some more class. Hey, Pete, I got a question for you. Though. I mean, a lot of times that contamination may be coming from off-site too, correct?
Yep. Yes, it can, and that's why a good understanding of the site geology is important.
Because I know there was a site down there outside of Newberrytown. I guess it actually ended up being a Superfund site, and the contamination actually, from what I understand, actually went underneath Interstate 83 and contaminated properties on the other side of the highway, and that's why they put public water in back there.
That's exactly right, and that's a large commercial industrial facility that, not necessarily large, but that kind of a release is pretty large to cause those kinds of problems. But you're absolutely correct.
So because of the way maybe like water flows or something, that could actually bring it quite a distance then, right? Absolutely.
It can carry it long distances. Some contaminants can travel for miles away from the source.
Because I think the general public, a lot of times when you talk about contamination and sites, they think of Love Canal if they're old enough to know what that was, and they sort of picture in their heads like 55-gallon drums rusting and tipped over out there in the trees, right?
Right.
Yeah, we only hide our bodies in those drums
right.
now.
But it can be as simple as if you think about it, go back to the 50s, 60s, and 70s, let's say the early 70s. A lot of the practices at even small facilities was to just simply, if you had let's take a gas station or a repair station as an example, that's using degreasers and those kinds of things. They just pitch them out the back door onto the soil. And what problem was it? Ultimately it causes a problem because it can get into the groundwater and start to move. And those are ones that are really tough to find, because if you get a report like that, you've identified a potential recognized environmental condition, if you will, a potential problem, but where to look. And that kind of leads to the phase two. Once you've identified that there's the potential for a problem, you go into what's called a phase 2, which is really a program of sampling and analysis to determine, is this potential, is it real? Is there some result from? Is there some negative result as from the practice that was identified?
So a real world example on that might be, for example, like a service station where I've seen where they've got I see that they're replacing the tanks or something.
Yeah, the service stations are fairly highly regulated these days, and those regulations occurred back in the late 80s, early 90s. So that all the tanks theoretically were replaced for active service stations. The problem is those service stations that you don't see, that you don't even identify as being a service station, but in the 30s and 40s and 50s was a gas station, and trying to determine, and that's where the historical understanding of what those sites were used for becomes critical, because if you identify the fact that it was, for example, an old gas station, and there's no record, and if you were to drive by today, maybe it's a beauty shop. You have no idea that at one time it was a gas station. But the historical record can indicate it, and that's when it becomes critical to start looking to see, is there anything still there, such as an old buried tank that obviously has probably been leaking for 20 or 30 years.
So the phase 1 has no sampling of the soil or anything like that. That's you moving into phase 2.
Right. The phase 1 simply identifies whether or not there's a potential for a problem. The phase 2 determines does the problem really exist.
So this could actually also, from residential homeowner. I know from years ago there used to be it was common to bury oil tanks at homes. Is that something they would bring you in on if they thought there was a leak or something?
Absolutely. We get involved with all those kinds of things. And in fact, I've been involved with some litigation in New Jersey for those same kinds of things where the tank, where it was a buried underground storage tank that ultimately leaked, and unfortunately the person who currently happens to own the property has the liability for it. But that's where a phase 1 can come in handy, not particularly for a commercial property, because it helps reduce the liability to the buyer.
So I mean, anything that could be like a potential hazard, like oil. What are some of the other things that you test for? Because I can see a leaking underground oil tank in a house or at a farm. That could end up potentially getting into their water supply, right? Yes, sir,
it could. Absolutely, and that's a real problem.
And then it could carry for a distance. I may have the leak on my property, but it affects Kingsley's house, and now all of a sudden he's got to film on the pool with the volcano.
Well, Pennsylvania's got a lot of underground rivers too.
Well, excuse me. I'd like to dissuade you of that idea that it's actually a river. Pennsylvania is blessed with an abundance of groundwater, and the groundwater, I don't want to get too technical here, but groundwater flows in the fractures in the bedrock, and it's not a specific distinct river, so to speak. It's just about everywhere you drill, you could get water. And matter of fact, a friend of mine, we joked at one point that it would be difficult, except under certain geologic terrains, it's difficult to drill a hole in the ground, and at some point not find water. So they're not. It's not specifically defined rivers or flows, those kinds of things, except in limestone terrains, which is a little bit different. But it's pervasive. The groundwater is pervasive throughout the bedrock.
So phase 1, you come out, you visually inspect it, and then phase 2, you actually do some testing, maybe on the soils, the water. Anything else you might test?
Well, what you normally would do is if you suspect a contaminant, the presence of a contaminant, you do some surface soil sampling. You probably would maybe do some boreholes to see how extensive the contamination is, and if the contamination extends down, let's take a gasoline or an oil release from a tank. If the contamination extends down to the top of bedrock, then you have to go in and drill some monitoring wells to see whether or not that contamination has actually impacted the groundwater.
So how far do you go down in your initial samples?
Well, the soil samples you get out at least down to either to your sampling shows that you run out of the contamination, so to speak, that it's no longer present, or you continue it down to the top of bedrock.
So and then is there a phase 3?
Well, phase 3 in a sense, the phase 3 is the actual is the remediation of the site in a sense. In other words, those activities to do a cleanup. And in Pennsylvania, it's not so much considered phase 3, but what we normally do is is the cleanup under what's called the provisions of Act 2, which is a set of standards that the state has developed for cleanup of contaminated sites. And it's one of the best things, I think. Pennsylvania was a leader in this kind of thing. It's kind of the brownfield legislation, if you will. Pennsylvania basically led the nation in terms of showing people how to do it right. And what it does, it provides for the fact that even if suppose you have a big site and there is some contamination, it provides, it allows you to leave contamination on the site provided there is no risk to the environment or to persons.
Interesting.
And what it does, it's as I say, it sets these standards so that it makes properties much more saleable from a commercial point of view. In other words, prior to Act 2, people simply would not, for the most part, unless there was some compelling reason, would virtually walk away from sites that had contamination on them because of the liability. Act 2 provided the ability to clean up those sites and then, in a sense, leave some contamination in the ground and also provide relief from liability for following the cleanup, so that there wasn't always this legacy of the potential that the state would come back at the owner and require them to clean up to what's called background standards. Prior to Act 2, what the cleanup standard, so to speak, was to clean things up to the point where it was prior to civilization, if you will.
Interesting.
To pristine standards. Act 2 said, no, that's what we're going to do. Instead of doing it on that basis, we're going to do it on a risk basis. Is there any risk to the environment or to persons as a result of this contaminant? And if not, we'll sign off on the fact that your remediation is complete.
Hey, Pete, we're going to pay a couple bills here with a couple commercials. Stay on the line. We'll be right back with you.
Okay, thanks.
The Real Estate Radio Guys with John Rainville and Kingsley Harmer. We'll be right back.
Searching for a home online morning, noon, and night, looking at website after website, clicking contact me, and nobody does? Missed homes that were sold before you knew they were for sale? The better choice is searchhomesinpa.com. Search if you want, or they'll do it for you. Contact by phone, email, or text to adjust your search or to tour a property. Start online. They'll call you back at searchhomesinpa.com or call toll-free 855-919-HOME, and they'll do it for you. Searchhomesinpa.com, 855-919-4663.
Everyone wants to buy, sell, or invest in real estate. If only they knew the best way to do it. Hi, I'm John Rainville.
And I'm Kingsley Harmer.
And we're the Real Estate Radio Guys. We bring over 40 years' experience to talk about all things real estate.
Weekly, we'll discuss the latest trends, hot topics, along with tips and techniques that could save you thousands and eliminate headaches.
So tune in to the Real Estate Radio Guys, Saturdays at 8 a.m. here on WHYL 102.9. Real topics, real answers for real people.
Buying or selling a home? For professional home inspection, call EnviroQuest of Harrisburg. Their certified home inspectors will conduct a thorough inspection and provide a detailed report with many pictures. They'll explain the findings. Do you have elevated radon levels in your house? Call EnviroQuest. They have fixed over 10,000 homes over the last 25 years. For a professional home inspection or radon mitigation, call EnviroQuest at 233-6144, 233-6144, or visit EnviroQuest online at evqharrisburg.com. That's evqharrisburg.com.
Back to the show, the Real Estate Radio Guys with John Rainville and Kingsley Harmer.
So good morning. We're back with Pete Robelen from Water Services Ltd., local professional geologist. Is that the correct term for you, Pete?
That's correct, and the company is GeoServices.
Okay, GeoServices Limited, right there. And Pete, can you give us now this phase one audit, a lot of it we've been talking about is outside, but I guess I know other things you might do. You might go into an old dry cleaner building, right?
Right. And looking both the inside and the outside. Dry cleaners, old dry cleaners, were kind of could have been in some cases were an environmental nightmare. The fluids that they used were very, very similar to gasoline, and they had the potential for they were fairly soluble in water. So if they got to the groundwater system, it was just kind of Katie bar the door, so to speak.
I have a question, actually. We're into this inside outside. When your services, when are they required? I mean, right now it sounds like if I've got questions on what the contaminations are like or what there may be in the ground, is there a point in this whole process that says there's a report required before I build or do anything on it that says we need to call Pete to get this done?
I don't think so. It's pretty much voluntary, although in some cases the banks will insist on it. The lending agencies will insist on completion of a phase one. But I don't believe there's any regulatory requirement that a phase one be completed. It really kind of gets down to it gets down to a level of an understanding of the risk and the risk tolerance of a potential buyer. And you've got to understand that even some very modest value properties can have some serious environmental liabilities to the point where the cost of remediation is more than the property's worth. We've been involved with several of those, and it's a shame. I mean, the result of a past activity that wasn't identified before the person bought it resulted in a massive cleanup, which is, as I say, the cleanup was cost more than the property was worth, and that's that. So it doesn't make any difference whether it's a $100,000 property or a $5 million property. They can all have potential problems.
Pete, I seem to remember something from years ago that, let's just say that I had property and it was contaminated, and I sell it to my buddy here, Kingsley. Am I still on the hook for that?
Yes and no. If Kingsley has a thorough environmental site assessment completed, and let's say the problem with some of these things is that the presence of contamination may not always be evident. But if he has a thorough environmental site assessment that shows up, he's basically done what's his due diligence relative to that, and so he's a little bit off the hook, but. And you may still be on the hook, however, as the original seller. But that's kind of wandering into the legal realm.
That's where they may bring you in on like a litigation and get you in the court to give your expert testimony. Is that
right?
Is that an example?
Yeah.
So as a buyer, I'm actually protecting myself by getting a phase one.
Sure, and what it also offers you is the opportunity to say, all right, no, if suppose we identify a problem, and you can say, all right, is it still worth consider? Do I still want to consider pursuing the purchase? And you may say, yeah, this property is that valuable to me, so let's move to the next step, which would be a phase two, and that can be used to define the costs of cleanup. And then at that point, what we've seen for the most part is kind of a joint agreement between the buyer and the seller to get the property cleaned up.
So this is more or less an extension of a home inspection per se.
Yeah, the home inspection on steroids in a sense.
Right. To say, all right, look, I may be subject to either A, litigation, or EPA something down the road where I'm going to have this cleanup. So because I'm buying this large commercial property, which is what it sounds like more often than not, John's selling me this garbage property, and he knows it.
Hey, I had nice dirt and grass planted
over top of it.
Over top of it, right.
So I'm assuming that there's something similar to a seller's disclosure that he decides not to disclose to me in this property, that he decided to dump dead bodies in barrels under the ground. So I go ahead and I build a house, a plant, whatever the case may be, and this pops up. At that particular point in time, if it wasn't established from a phase one that's where the liability would go back on him, it sounds like.
Oh, no, I bought that property from Big Dog back here.
That's my understanding, yeah. Like I say, that's where both of you end up getting good attorneys involved.
So ignorance is not bliss in this particular scenario, is what you're saying?
No.
Okay.
Because you will, particularly as I say, if you're buying a large commercial property, chances are that the lending agency, unless you're really loaded and going to finance it yourself, the lending agency is going to come to you and say, we're going to before we will lend you the money, we're going to require that you complete a phase one as a minimum.
Interesting. And just out of curiosity, I know you mentioned early on that you can't afford yourself as far as a service, but what are we talking as far as cost to do a simple phase one?
Phase ones in this part of the world run anywhere from I'd say like $1,600 or $1,700 up to about $2,300.
Oh, okay.
They're not. And in terms of relative to the cost of a property, they're not prohibitive to be done.
Okay, I was thinking something well beyond that. So I mean, really, this is the cost of a home inspection on steroids.
Yeah, it is, and the cost of phase ones has come down considerably since we first started doing them. As the standards develop, and everybody had a clear idea of what the goals were.
And a phase one, just for purposes of clarification, is really strictly only for environmental issues. I mean, you're not going to go into a warehouse and say, "Hey, we've got structural issues here."
No,
we're talking just chemicals, water, the possibilities of contamination from something.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Pete, can you touch briefly on? I know you know water services. What does that mean? What do you do? Are you like one of those water witches? What do you do?
Well, no, not really. What we do a lot of water supply work for water suppliers, whether they be commercial water suppliers, folks like Suez or Aqua and PA American. We do work for those kinds of folks. We do work for individual plants and so forth that have a water need. And what we do is
what do you do for them? Do you like check water flow or quality of the water?
All of that. We can check their water quality. We can identify places to drill a well, and we help them with the permitting, the aquifer testing to make sure that the well can perform over the long haul to provide the water that they need. So and then it gets into if the withdrawal is significant enough, over 100,000 gallons a day, we help them with permitting through the Susquehanna River Basin Commission and also through DEP.
I have to ask, what is water witching?
Well, I've never done it. My dad claims to be able to do it with a pair of pliers, but it basically it's walking around with a stick or a pair of pliers or something like this, and seeing whether or not I don't believe in it, but some people swear by it.
Yeah, I know. Vern Sealover used to have Sealover Homes. I mean, he was a local water witch, and he would actually do it with like a branch off of like a willow tree.
Yeah, I've seen that on shows or something. Yep. I didn't believe in any of that. That's crazy.
I still don't, but some people swear by it. My dad was one, and I have some geologists friends who believe in it too. I mean, it's one of those things. It does it or doesn't
start to
work.
Vibrate on you or something? Oh my God!
Yeah,
there's water over there?
Apparently the twig or whatever you're using starts to move up and down or shake or vibrate, and you say that's the spot where there's water. But as we said earlier, at least in this part of Pennsylvania, except in certain geologic terrains, it's difficult to drill a well and not get some water. And I had a standing bet with a guy who I said, look, you believe in it strongly enough, you find a place where there is no water, and we'll drill a well, and whoever the cost of the well goes on whoever loses.
Did he take you up?
No.
Well, I think that's kind of a costly.
It is. Bet. You're talking $6,000 or $7,000 or $8,000 at that point, and it's not worth the face saving to do it.
So back on this water testing, were you involved at all in the Fairview Township area where they had the whole water issue that we're talking about with the water runoff? I mean...
Oh, you mean Newberry Township?
Yeah.
That's over in Newberry.
Well, they did it over at Fairview, too, because they're forcing everybody onto the public water in Fairview Township, right? So they're forcing everybody that has wells to hook over and pay to hook into this public water. So
I'm not getting hooked on.
I'm just telling you, it's being forced upon all the people, and they're either paying for it up front or they're going to be charged in the water service. So at what point does a service like yours come into play to say, hey, yeah, this is required, or is it just political?
Well, it's a little bit of both. We were involved years ago in a similar situation in Middletown Borough where there was a known trichloroethylene release, and there were a lot of folks that had private wells. And the borough said, you simply can't. We have to provide you we have to provide public water because it's too dangerous to continue drinking your wells. And there was a lot of pushback at public meetings and so forth. And I did my Clint Eastwood impersonation. I said, basically, how lucky do you feel when it comes to when it comes to drinking that water? And you have to. At that point, it was absolutely necessary that it to be done. I'm not familiar with the situation in Fairview. I'm sorry that I don't. But in cases where there is contamination and there's potential for impacts to public health, it becomes the municipality's duty, if you will, to require its citizens to hook up, because they have. People don't understand. You don't taste it or anything else like that, but you've got grandchildren, you've got children who could be drinking that stuff for 18, 20 years, and it's a long-term impact.
All right. One last question for you, Pete.
Sure.
Since we're on the public health and water, Michigan.
Detroit, you mean?
Yeah. What's the deal?
Oh, the lead issues.
Why is this still an issue, and why hasn't it? It seems like nobody's doing anything about it. Is it not fixable? Is it just a cost issue?
It's fixable. Here's the issue with that for the most part, and I'm kind of it. The lead is a result of leaching of lead from the old style pipes, and some water, if you passed it through the pipe, wouldn't make any difference. It's not really aggressive. Some of the water that I think is that's being withdrawn for use in Detroit is a pretty aggressive water. By that I mean it can leach materials. It's strong and it can leach materials from the pipe, and that's the problem. They changed over the water, as I understand it. They changed the water supply, and that the new water supply that they're using is much more aggressive than the prior supply that they had. So it's leaching lead from the pipes, and it is a real issue. There's no question about it.
So what's the cure? Change the water supply back?
Well, to treat the water so that it's not as aggressive as it is, or to replace all the lead pipes, and that's wildly expensive.
Interesting.
Probably not doable. It's simpler probably to adjust the water quality prior to entering the pipes.
Okay. Well, again, Pete, thanks for coming on today. I know I learned a lot today.
Good.
If somebody needs to get a hold of you for water test, phase 1 tests, or buying a piece of property, what's the best contact information for you?
Our telephone number is 717-303-2660. We have a website, www.geoservicesltd.com, or you could just simply send an email to, you can say just a water supply at geoservicesltd.com.
All right. Pete, well, thanks for coming on. Our listeners, I'm sure, have learned quite a bit, as did I, at the very least, water witching. Have a great weekend.
I hope so too. I hope to do that. Thank you so much, sir.
So yeah, interesting. You never heard about water witching before?
I never heard of it use that term. I've seen them, on commercials or cartoons or whatever. There's always somebody wearing that branch. I'm like, what the hell is a branch?
You put a tinfoil hat on, and you get a locust or a willow.
Well, I thought the tinfoil hat was for aliens.
No. You got to keep that radiation down so you can.
Oh, so there's a whole science to this.
Well, sometimes they'll just line their baseball hat with foil so you can't see it.
Okay.
So our favorite property inspector, Mr. Staz, I know, is waiting in the wings, and John's got a topic today that sort of feeds right into with what we were talking about with Pete. He's going to be talking about household hazards, mold, asbestos, radon, and water contaminants, because in the household things, it can be common. I mean, a lot of people aren't aware of what's out there. Good morning, John. How are you doing?
Hey, good morning. How are you guys doing?
Good. Hey, we're going to need you to speak up a little bit more. It sounds like you're in the Grand Canyon.
Are you on the beach?
I'm on the highway. Let me pull over here.
It sounded like he was at a
better?
beach. Where are you on the way to? You on the way to a beach?
Yeah, on the way to a beach at a soccer game.
Okay.
On the way to a soccer game in York. So
Another soccer game. So how long does that soccer go on for you?
Goes on all year.
Oh, well, boy, I didn't sound any enthusiasm in that.
Yeah, they during the winter we just switched to indoor. So
Okay.
So let's talk about those household contaminants first, John. I mean, what are some of the household hazards people need to know about?
Well, sure. As you were talking about with the previous guest, the concern for public safety. So as a home inspector, we're looking out for our clients buying a home. And some of the things that we run into, or some of the things that we look for in a home inspection, of course, as you know, the optional testing would be radon. I guess in the real estate contract, am I correct, it advises that this area is elevated for radon and consider testing. And then, I'd say the lion's share of people opt to do a radon test. So we test for radon, one of the items. Another thing, interestingly enough, in most of the home inspection protocols, they exclude environmental hazards such as asbestos. Why do you think that is?
Because, there may be asbestos, right? Somebody may have sided over it, right? There could be that old
shingles,
or shingles. Yeah, I bet there's a lot of places you guys can find some of that hidden where you wouldn't know up inside a wall in that.
Yeah, there's so many categories of material. The way the EPA, the definition is any material, flooring material, insulation material, roofing material, siding material manufactured before 1980 should be considered to contain asbestos unless tested to prove otherwise. So that's a huge category of materials. So, there's a lot of items that could have hidden asbestos, and you'd spend a fortune trying to test for it. So one of the things we look for is there's two categories of asbestos. There's what's considered friable and non-friable. Friable means it can be easily crushed between your fingers. So asbestos being an inhalation hazard, we look for asbestos that's crumbling, like turning to powder. That's the type that could be dangerous. If it's in a piece of wallboard covered with paint, unless you can crush it or destroy it or you're doing demolition, you're not going to breathe that material.
So in an inspection, per se, in a house, especially one that was, say, built in the 1950s or something, a common place for asbestos would be pipes, right?
Yeah. So on a hydronic heating system that has the old boiler pipes, asbestos was commonly used to insulate those pipes. So that's one of the places we find it would be in the basement and the pipes.
And from my understanding, over the years, obviously, that they've changed what's been required, but to change that out would be a costly undertaking. So nowadays, it's all about just encapsulating that asbestos, or in this particular case, as far as pipes, right? I mean, you want to kind of just encapsulate it in plastic or some sort of compound to make sure that it doesn't get into the air quality.
Yeah, so if you remove it, then you're faced with an additional cost to re-insulate it. So if you can encapsulate it, sometimes that's a better option, less expensive. And the other side of the coin is that it's actually a very good insulator. It does its job very well. So if you have asbestos and you can preserve it or encapsulate it so it's no longer a health hazard, then it usually works out pretty well because of the qualities of the material as far as preventing heat loss.
Now, is there any sort of steps that you would have to take if you were removing it?
Well, we usually recommend to get a professional person to remove it because there's, in this country, there's guidelines for removal. Some other countries, like, for example, countries where they don't have laws or guidelines for the removal of asbestos, they just recommend to wet it because, once again, it's an inhalation hazard. So if the material is wet, it can't become airborne, if it's thoroughly wetted. But we usually just recommend a professional. So they follow standards for removal that are similar to mold removal, where they set up a containment, plastic barriers to contain the material. They do wet it during the removal, and they contain the material. They set up a containment that's depressurized, negative air, so that if any of it does become airborne, it can't get out of the containment and become airborne.
Interesting.
But John, there's other hidden things, like when we're talking about contaminants. I ran into this on a property before, with the copper piping, where the homeowner didn't realize, and they were using lead solder, when they put the pipes together instead of the silver solder, and I've had that contaminate the water. Kingsley's giving me faces today, buddy, like you wouldn't believe.
No. How is a home inspector going to actually look for that?
Well, no. That would come up in a water test, though, right, John?
Yeah. That a water test which tests for lead, that can come up. As your previous guest was talking about the aggressive water, if you have a non-aggressive water and you have that layer of slime that we talked about on the show, the good slime, right, Kingsley? Yeah, the good slime on your pipes. That'll actually coat the pipes and protect things for like lead getting into the water. But if you do have an aggressive water, that's going to cause, possibly cause the lead to get into the water quality. So, yeah, there was a big recall in the 1980s on in schools on the water fountains because they used lead solder in them too. It was pretty common to use lead solder, some time ago, and then. They took it out, obviously, health reasons.
Kingsley thinks his parents only used lead solder. There wasn't supposed to be solder on that straw, honey.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting if you listen or go on the internet, the lead level in kids, like during the 70s, it was like super, super high. Just the average kid from all sources, from lead that was in fuel. We have unleaded gas now, but just living and breathing, you got high lead levels in kids, like during the 70s, which are much, much lower now due to the efforts we've made of cleaning everything up.
So, John, getting off topic here for a quick, but what is your child's team name today? What's the soccer team's name that you're that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're the Fusion Strikers.
The Fusion Strikers. So we're thumbs up for the Fusion Strikers.
We're
today.
rooting. Everybody's rooting for them.
Yeah.
Bring it home.
All right, cool.
Next week we're going to ask to see if they won. So how long is this particular season?
This is our last game, and actually this game, we're in first place whether we win or lose this game. So we're going to
what
play
a bad
anyway.
Position to be in.
Well, you can put the water boy in today then. Okay, I got you.
Yeah, we can put the water boy. Yep.
All right, John, drive safe.
Great.
Have a fantastic day. Enjoy your weekend.
All right,
and go Fusion.
You guys have a great weekend.
Thanks, John.
Interesting, huh?
Yeah.
So, we're now into the summer season, so I now have my summer buying and selling reports out. So if any of our listeners want that, please just PM me on, the Real Estate Radio Guys site. Be happy to send you a copy. I wanted to mention, right now it's summer, and there's still 4 excellent reasons to buy a home right now. And Kingsley likes these. Prices are going to continue to go up, folks. We're not in one of the bubble areas. There are about a dozen bubble areas in the country, but we're not one of them.
I don't think we've ever really been a bubble area in PA. I mean, we've been kind of steady, consistent.
Mortgage rates are expected to increase. That'll be the reason number 2. Buy now.
Your affordability is going to go down.
And this one, either way, you're paying a mortgage.
That you are. Might as well be less.
And don't you think it's time to move on with your life and get off your parents' sofa?
Did you see that one lawsuit? The 32-year-old
they had to evict their kids.
Sued his parents.
He fought them.
He sued his parents because they pushed him out of the house at 30. Was he 34 years old or something like that?
Yeah.
God. Yeah, I mean, all those reasons are certainly phenomenal reasons to buy now. I mean, at the end of the day, there was also an article out that says, millennials are skipping the starter homes. They're going right to their dream homes. And with you going from 0 to 60, in 1 second, you're pushing yourself to that $250,000 to $500,000 range is what they're doing. They're pushing their limits as far as their income's concerned.
But from a realtor side, that makes good sense to me for long-term play because now they're going to maximize their appreciation over time.
It can, yeah. Now,
as long as they're confident their income's going to
right. Now
to rise.
you also got to keep in mind you're in a different segment. You know what I mean? So if you're in that 3 to 500 as opposed to 1 to 300,000, you're going to have different movement and different appreciation. However, if you're looking for right now and you're starting to look and say, hey, I want to build a home, as we've already seen, the cost of building has gone way up.
Yep.
The cost of supplies is going up, right? Even something as simple as a tariff could, raise the cost of building. So with that in mind, with interest rates, that $250,000 house can literally be pushed out of your affordability range if you wait too long.
And an interesting statistic I saw out this week was, the percentage of someone's income, whether they're looking to rent, median rent, or buy a home, and they're saying that about 28%, almost 29% of someone's income is needed to buy a median home, average home, but to purchase it's only 17%. So a big advantage to buy over rent.
Still is.
Right,
yeah.
Huge. That's huge.
That is huge.
Now, my experience has been, and you tell me as a loan officer, is that person that their rent may be that 17%, but they'll spend more so that they can get a little bit of the tax benefit and get a home that they're going to grow into a little bit.
Yeah, and I've actually been seeing that more and more recently where people are literally trying to stretch.
So still have zero down programs, right?
Still zero down programs.
And credit challenge people. So I'm going to, one thing, use Kingsley and I as resources. If you have questions on real estate, reach out to me. If on Facebook, by email, or pick up the phone. But Kingsley, there's no cost or obligation to get the information.
There really isn't. And then all it is a phone call. What you want to do as well, if you're thinking about moving, even if you're thinking about moving up, call John, call myself, and just get the process rolling early so you know what you're in for. And if you're looking to get pre-qualified and possibly move up, know that you can afford the new home. Even if you don't want to sell your old home, there are certainly options to keep it as a rental.
A lot of what we do in our job, folks, is we try to keep it as stress-free of a process as we can. It can be stress, when you're buying and selling.
Oh, yeah.
And there's stress on the financial side. Sometimes there's stress on the real estate side. But that's what a realtor does. That's what a loan officer does. We're problem solvers. And we have, like Kingsley said, decades of experience that you can rely on to help you make the transition you want, whether it's moving up, moving down, moving to a vacation home.
Or like we touched on earlier, the ugly term reverse mortgage, and we're actually going to have a show coming up on those, actually may be a benefit to some people. For those people that don't have a lot of retirement income, could be a supplement.
So there's people we were talking about earlier.
Right.
Maybe instead of doing that 30-year and stretching it out, maybe they could have just done a reverse mortgage.
Get income as opposed to paying.
Wow.
Changes your lifestyle.
So we're going to talk about that sometime in July?
I think so.
All right. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Next week we're going to be talking with Attorney Craig Deal. He's a local attorney and a CPA, and we're going to be talking about what an attorney does in a real estate transaction, some of the benefits, some of the things they can do. There are things that an attorney can bring to the table. It just depends on each individual real estate transaction.
Awesome. Until next week, we're just two crazy guys that like real estate.
Yep.
Real people.
Real topics.
Real attorneys.
Till next week, folks.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Real Estate Radio Guys with John Rainville and Kingsley Harmer. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit pagoloan.com, brokersrealty.com, and facebook.com/Real Estate Radio Guy. If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review, and we'll catch you next time.